Hi, I'm Robert Wright. I run the Non-Zero Foundation, which produces all the shows on Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV. We host a variety of voices, some of them pretty unorthodox, and we encourage dialogue that is sharp but civil. We think fostering constructive conversation is especially important now that America and the world are looking kind of fragile. If you agree that our mission is important, I hope you'll consider helping us shoulder the cost. You can do that by becoming one of our cherished patrons at patreon.com/nonzero foundation. That's NONZEROFOUNDATION. Thanks. We need your help, and we deeply appreciate it.
Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome back to the DMZ, everybody.
Wednesday morning, school back in session for a lot of kids. Not mine yet. Mine are next week.
Yes. Oh, your kids are actually going physically back.
No. Remote only.
Oh, okay, remote.
Okay. We're not a hybrid district. We are remote, I think, at least till November, and I guess there'll be some kind of reassessment. But there are things that we have to prepare for. I picked up a Chromebook for my younger one yesterday. I'll pick up a Chromebook for my older one today, and had to sit through a training last night. I think I have one of my kids be at my mother's house to keep the kids separated so they won't distract each other.
Gotta keep them separated.
So I imagine I'm like a lot of parents who are not getting a respite, even though school's back in session.
Yeah. It's tough. It is tough being a parent. It's very tough. Very tough. And Bill, I'm a proponent of having lots of kids, and I think at the macro level that's a good policy and it makes a lot of sense. But I understand why people are not having kids. Actually, it's a tough gig. It's a very tough gig. This was our first week back at school, so that's the experience I'm coming out of.
It's remote or in person?
They're doing it in person.
So is it a hybrid, or you're fully in person?
Fully in person. Our school, seems like they've taken as many precautions as possible. There's masks, there's temperatures taken before they can go in. The classes are segregated so that they do not come into contact with other classes, so that if there were an instance, it theoretically would not spread. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's still going to a building with other people. So,
So do you know what the rule is if there is a case?
I don't. I think that if there's even a case in another school, it would be interesting to see what happened. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't even have to be my kid's school. If there was a case at a different school nearby, I wonder, I think there's a fear that this thing could get shut down. And, what is the right policy there? Is it, if you wait till you see a few cases, it's probably too late, right? But on the other hand.
Well, that was always my concern. I mean, I participated in one school committee meeting. So in Massachusetts, there are state guidelines, and their guidelines for when there's a case in your school, in my opinion, was way too lax. Because my opinion is, you got one case, you shut it down. Because if there's one case, there's likely more cases, and time is of the essence. And this was, there's a case, you should quarantine for 10 days or 14 days, you and your family, anyone in close contact with. If there's more than one case, then you have a discussion about shutting down a school, and then you need multiple cases in more than one school to shutting down the district. And it was just kind of loosey-goosey. Yeah. And so I said in the local meeting, I would go well beyond that and say, one case, boom, shut it down. And I don't think I was the determining factor in any decisions that were made. But I think an argument was, if you are likely to end up shutting things down at some point, well, then you've put a lot of resources into figuring out a hybrid system, just straight up money, and you need money to figure out a remote system. So you've really screwed yourself if you didn't just do that on the front end and figure out how to do remote properly.
Is this when the day the bill took down the Harper Valley PTA?
I sort of did no such thing.
I still want to hear. I still want to hear a song about it. I need a ballad about this on my desk by 5.
But I wonder if it's for your school district and others who are doing in-person or hybrids, are they prepared for going remote, or are they going to be really flat-footed?
I think they would be, because we did that, obviously, like a lot of people. We did remote the last 3 months of the year.
But that remote for us was terrible. That was totally half-assed.
I would say logistically, ours worked okay. It was a lot of burden on us as parents, but it worked. From the kids' standpoint, I think they got a good education. But look, let's talk about the psychology of it. My kids have been home for 6 months, seeing each other, playing too much screen time, driving us crazy, fighting with each other. Just psychologically, I think I've just seen, like, just in the past day, they went back Tuesday. It's good for them to have a routine, to leave the house, to go to a different place, to learn, to have their, to be away from each other, in different classrooms.
Right.
And, I don't think it's healthy to keep them home and to keep things going the way that we're going. And look, we've tried our best to social distance and be responsible, but I think a lot of kids are either sitting home alone, which is not good, or they're going to like Walmart and everywhere else anyway. So like, I just don't know how long we could keep this going. And maybe the good news is that Donald Trump has a vaccine that's coming imminently, right?
Well, to bring this back into politics, I just think that I have a hard time believing this transition into school is going to go smoothly. I mean, even if like the majority of schools went fine, some portion of schools are not going to go fine.
Yeah.
And those schools will be in the news. And I think Trump needs, if he's to get back on his feet politically, he needs something to go well. He needs the sense of chaos and limbo to end, or have people having a feeling of we're going in the right direction, which is why he says the vaccine's coming.
Yeah.
But his credibility is shot. So only his own partisans believe that. And I just think coming out of,
I think a vaccine is coming.
Well, I mean, obviously, eventually, but like coming before Election Day is a lot less realistic.
It's almost like the Iran hostages to him at this point, isn't it? Like he needs the vaccine before November 3rd, but it seems like it might be January or something like that when it actually happens, like Inauguration Day.
Well, and I think in that case, there was some hope that it would happen before Election Day. And that was kind of keeping Carter in the game. His numbers were pretty bad ever since the helicopter crash, the failed rescue attempt in April of that year. But he was still in it. And the Reagan campaign actually cut an ad in preparation for the hostages coming home. So they'd have something to say in that instance. I mean, there was political concern on their part that would happen, so
Trump is trying to sell. I mean, if you listen to the rally he had in North Carolina on Tuesday night, I mean, Trump is continuing to try to sell a narrative that everything was great, and then this China plague hit.
Right, not my fault.
Everything was perfect up until then, and then everything bad that has happened is only because of that China plague, and because he made the economy great once, he could do it. He's best prepared to do it again, and it's all we need is the vaccine, and then we go back to things being awesome. I mean, that is a very simplistic version, but that's the story he is trying to tell.
It's funny that you mentioned that, and Matt and I were talking about election modeling before when we were pre-gaming the show.
Our extensive pre-game conversations.
And actually, I wasn't going to get into this during the show, but Trump is pushing that narrative that everything was going fine until the plague hit, and I think there's a slight risk of that actually getting into the historical narrative, which I think is wrong. I mean, Biden was beating Trump in nearly every trial heat, and certainly in the averages, consistently and substantially, going back to September of 2019, when I know at least in the Real Clear Politics average they began tracking it. There's no point where Trump was ever ahead. There's no point where Trump's job approval was above water. So, I mean,
I would say this. I think his approval ratings were like the highest they had been right before this happened.
No. No, he had a bit of a bump when the pandemic began in late March. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, I mean, and some people thought this was actually going to help him, but of course, his bump of a few points was nothing like the bumps that all the governors got, which were through the roof, and that bump subsided. So you look at the job approval chart. I mean, it's just underwater from the get go. And one of the interesting aspects of his presidency is his GDP numbers don't track his approval numbers. If he was a boring president, GDP numbers would probably be coasting him to re-election. It would have been coasting him to re-election before the pandemic. So there's been this ongoing argument between Nate Silver at 538 and G. Elliott Morris of The Economist. They have competing models going on. Now, it's sort of a silly debate because The Economist has Biden at 84% and 538 has Biden at 71%. Like, these are not enormous differences.
Likely to win.
Likely to win the Electoral College. So they're both saying Biden's the favorite. It's a matter of degree. And how uncertain should you be? Is it a 1 in 3 chance Trump wins, or is it a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance? And the 538 model has a fundamentals prior that assumes that without a lot of other factors that Trump would be up 2 points. And in the 538 model, they don't include job approval as a metric. Mm-hmm. In Nate's view, by this stage of the game, job approval is too closely associated with voter behavior and therefore doesn't impact voter behavior. Whereas G. Elliott Morris argues there's a very close correlation between job approval and voter behavior, so it's why you absolutely should put it in there. And so his fundamentals don't assume a slight Trump lead that negates the other factors in Biden's favor. That's one of the big reasons why The Economist has a bigger probability for Biden than 538 does. So there is this debate, whether Trump should be ahead because of the fundamentals or not. And I think that Trump's behavior as president and his constant, morass of scandals has always weighed down his ability to win re-election. And that has been reflective in his job approval rating. And you can't just remove that from the equation.
No, I mean, I remember I gave a speech in D.C. right before, it was after COVID, but before things shut down. And it was a political briefing, like, here's the state of the race. And I thought it was a jump ball back then. This is before anything shut down. And I said, on one hand, Trump should win. Historically, in modern history, we tend to reelect incumbent presidents. The economy's pretty good. He hasn't started any new wars. He's taken out some of these, terrorists. But then on the other hand, Joe Biden's better than Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, when Trump was running before, he didn't really, you could be whatever you wanted him to be. He didn't have to defend any of a bad record. I think at the time, my point was that you could make Trump had only won 3 states by 77,000 votes, right? I mean, I think you could have made a pretty compelling case either way that Trump ought to win or that Biden ought to win. But now I think that after everything that's happened in the intervening months, you should say pretty clearly that this is Joe Biden's race to lose. I think it's a little bit amazing that Trump is still in it to the extent that I think he is. I'm not, if I had to bet today, I think Biden's going to win, but I'm not as confident. If you had said to me, back when I did this speech, okay, here's going to be the unemployment rate is going to be this, and there's going to be a pandemic, and here's how Trump will have mishandled it, and here's what Trump will have said about military veterans, and then I would have said, well, he should be doing much worse. He should have no chance at all. This would be catastrophic. He's Herbert Hoover, and it doesn't feel like he's Herbert Hoover.
Well, the bottom hasn't completely dropped out yet.
Hoover didn't have a welfare state to keep things from completely crashing.
Right. Well, that's right. You might have thought, in June when Biden was averaging, plus 10, that maybe the bottom was falling out, and we're not there yet because things have inched back a little bit, and now it's Biden plus 7 nationally, and with smaller leads in all the battleground states, or most of the battleground states, and I think that speaks to just the deep political polarization. You have a hardcore Trump base that's very hard to move. Now, yesterday we had a couple of Florida polls. The one that got the most attention was Marist, which had it tied and actually had Trump up a few points among Hispanics. And you also had a Miami-specific poll where, Biden was leading with Hispanics, but not by nearly as much as Clinton did in 2016. So those two numbers seem to align. Now, Marist took a beating a month ago because they announced they weren't going to wait by education. And they had a long justification of that, saying that they were doing other things, other weightings that were going to do the trick better. But there is enough data in Florida to suggest Biden is underperforming there relative to where Hillary was. And if that's the case, you're then relying on improvement among whites, which Biden has showed to possibly win in Florida. Biden still leads Florida in averages, just not by a lot. Now, there was another poll that came out yesterday, which was from a Biden PAC, Unite the Country. This was done by Greenberg Quinlan Research, which is the Democratic polling firm, and had Biden up in Florida by 5, but had a relatively detailed memo that talked about where Biden stood with Latinos and Hispanics that showed him underperforming there. And the only poll that I've seen that has broken it out by Cuban and non-Cuban, because Cubans in Florida are very Republican, and non-Cubans less so. So Biden was winning with non-Cubans and losing with Cubans, but was doing considerably worse than Hillary amongst non-Cubans. This is Mexican, Puerto Rican, probably a few Venezuelan. The Venezuelans, I think, operate a little closer to Cubans. They're more anti-communist. And so that's a bit of a mystery why that's the case. And from my reading of that poll memo, and the Marist poll, I should say, the Unite the Country memo said Trump's favorability with non-Cuban Hispanics was at 40%. And that pretty much tracked his vote. He got 38% in that vote. We get better than he did with non-Cuban Hispanics in Florida in 2016, which was like 20-something. If these folks just like Trump better than they did 4 years ago, that's not Biden's fault. Biden can't fix that. If they have a dislike of Biden or an unfamiliarity with Biden, Biden.
Why would is this a policy that Trump has advocated toward Cuba as opposed to Obama, or is this a stylistic thing? What is it about Trump as opposed to, say, other Republicans? I mean, what is it about Trump, Trump 2020 versus Trump 2016, let's say, that has changed?
Well, I have no explanation for you as terms of Trump's improvement amongst non-Cuban Hispanics in Florida. With Cubans, with Trump was doing a little bit better than we did before, according to this one poll. You could say rise of socialism in the Democratic Party, AOC, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowen, drumbeat of that in right-wing circles. Even though Biden's saying, hey, that's not me, he's still getting tagged with that, and Cubans don't want any part of it. And to the extent there's also a small portion of Venezuelans, them too. But the broader non-Cuban community of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans, I don't have a good reason for you there. I don't know what Trump said that's so great. I'm pretty hard-pressed to come up with something. All I'm saying is, so I mentioned that that favorability number in the Unite the Country PAC poll. In the Marist poll, Florida Hispanics generally had a net positive job approval rating for Trump. I mean, look, if that's the case, that's the case. I think if your opinion of Trump is going to be pretty baked in after 3+ years. Biden can only improve to the extent that people don't know him well enough, and he needs to be out there more, needs to do more interviews, some campaign appearances in person, more ads. I think they're certainly doing the ads and the interviews. Kamala's going there tomorrow, so it's not that they're unaware of an issue there. But there may be, for some weird reason, Trump's improving some of that community.
Florida is hugely important for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, go back to 2000 for an example of how important Florida is. But one of the reasons Florida is important is that they tend to count their votes early, too.
Yeah.
And I think they can count the mail-in votes or start counting them before Election Day. So if Biden were to win Florida pretty decisively on election night, that would probably mitigate some of the damage that, could happen to this democracy or this republic versus if Trump were to win Florida and then you have that nightmare scenario where it looks like Trump won on election night, but he really didn't. If you're rooting for a scenario that is very clear, very clean, and will not, cause conspiracy theories, you'd probably be rooting for Biden to decisively win Florida.
Right. And as of today, Biden's ahead in Florida, but not decisively. It's one of his more narrow. You go back a month or so ago, it looked like Florida was looking kind of in the bag for Biden, and Wisconsin was looking kind of close. Now Wisconsin is one of Biden's better battlegrounds. There's a poll coming out later today from Marquette that's considered one of the better Wisconsin polls. So maybe that might change narratives. But there's been a handful of Wisconsin polls coming out post Kenosha where Biden's doing a pretty solid 6 points, which speaks to the conclusion I've drawn over the past few months, which is chaos is bad for the incumbent. The assumptions of white backlash helping Trump have not panned out. Again, maybe that will be countered by whatever comes from Marquette today. And you look overall, so as much as there's been this skittishness amongst Democrats about Florida in the past 24 hours, and it's not that Biden should be dismissive of it and should probably redouble some efforts there, you still are not seeing Trump getting leads in pretty much any of the swing states. You've had a Rasmussen poll, and Rasmussen has a pretty big Republican lean with Biden up in Ohio. And Ohio's been a pretty lightly polled state, so we don't have a lot of Ohio data. But Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, North Carolina less so, But the Pennsylvania, Maris just gave Biden a big number in Pennsylvania today of 9 points. You're not seeing, I mean, you might see some minor narrowing. I think Arizona's a little narrower than it was a month or so ago, but it's still, 4 points Biden. I don't see these states tipping back to Trump so long as Biden is holding a 7-point national lead. There's a wind for Biden here. And you're not seeing these battleground states. I mean, they're less in Biden's camp than the national mean, but you're not seeing wild divergences between
Florida
these states and the national mood.
I think Florida is a state that ought to concern Democrats. You've got the Cuban aspect, which changes the Hispanic vote. You've got a lot of old people. I'm guessing there's a lot of Fox News watching going on down in Florida.
That's what's helping Biden. Biden is doing better with white seniors than Obama and Clinton did.
And a lot of New Yorkers, including Donald Trump, who became a Floridian. He's now, that's his home state now, right? So
I do wonder to what extent that has helped Trump. He is just in the news in Florida more because he goes there so frequently.
Yeah.
And so does that give him a bit of some of a positive factor? I mean, I can't know, of course, but it's a possibility. But Biden can lose Florida and still win. Biden has lots of paths. Just Florida would be a backbreaker, and a clear backbreaker if it was called on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way Trump wins without Florida.
Yeah. If you're watching and Trump takes Florida, which would probably be, would be called on election night most likely, it's going to be a long night probably.
Well, I don't think
it could be a long month. I
doubt Florida gets called for Trump Tuesday night. It could be close and not called right away. But I mean, Florida was close last time. It's never been in Trump's clear favor this time. I would be surprised if you saw a wild swing to Trump again, unless there's a wild swing nationally. I mean, if there's an actual good vaccine that comes out next month, if the economy goes gangbusters in the next month, if the schools work out so much better than anticipated. I mean, those are the kinds of things that might create change. But I think they would change on a national basis, not a Florida-specific basis.
But I think those things are – I mean, some of those things you mentioned are plausible. I think the school rollout could be better than we might think. Not going to be perfect, but it could go smoother. Even if we don't have a vaccine, if there are if Dr. Fauci's saying, I think this is going to be ready by the end of the year, it's looking good, we've got, clinical trials going, and if there is, it's not just Trump saying it, but if there is, reason to believe that something is imminent, things could be looking better for Trump increasingly. That's not a crazy, you don't have to be crazy to imagine that scenario.
Right, but I think external events have to happen in a big way for Trump to get back in this thing. I don't think Trump is going to get back in by hook and by crook with better YouTube ads.
Right.
With micro-targeting lobstermen in Maine too. I mean, he's doing all those things.
He doesn't control his own destiny. He needs needs some things to break his way.
That is my belief. And I know everyone's saying, what crazy things is he going to do between now and then? Because he's desperate. And he is desperate. I'm sure he is going to do crazy things. I think things have to get less crazy for Trump to win, not more crazy. If Kim Jong-un came in with a peace deal, that might be something that people go, maybe things are changing for the better here. Now that foreign policy usually has that big of an import. But, those are the kinds of things that would be more, neck snapping for me than Trump getting more and more unhinged, which I don't think is beneficial to him.
Trump did sort of go quiet the last couple weeks of the 2016 campaign. When the James Comey stuff came out, Trump quit tweeting and did kind of go, I don't want to say went dark, but he did lower his profile, which is very unlike him. Most people thought he just couldn't do it. I wonder if he could do it again.
Well, I mean, he he has some capacity to be disciplined for short doses of time. That helped him take a rapidly narrowing race and eke out a victory. I mean, that's not going to an extra dose of message discipline is not going to knock off a 7-point deficit. You know, he needs bona fide good things to occur. But you know, the thing that I think Democrats worry about the most is, you know, violence. Is he not going to concede? Is he not going to leave the office? Are people going to bring arms into the streets and whatnot? And I don't know.
But that's also, I mean, since you brought it up, I mean, that's one of the other ways Trump could win. It's not violence.
Well, I don't know if that's a winning, perhaps. He might cause bloodshed.
No. I'm not talking about Trump refusing to concede the election. I'm talking about if there is continued, you know, rioting and civil unrest, then I still think that benefits Trump. I mean, I'm sure these data crunchers will tell me that there's no evidence of that.
Well, I would tell you the evidence is the opposite. I mean, every bit of burst of rioting, it's gone the other way. Now, here's a message discipline thing that I find very befuddling. You had a bona fide Antifa sympathizer apparently murder a Trump supporter in cold blood on the streets of Portland, Oregon. And somehow Donald Trump and Fox News and OANN and right-wing talk radio has not made this the story over the past 7 days, because Trump instead took the bait of the Atlantic story of him calling military leaders dead veterans suckers and losers, and military leaders of being profiteering warmongers. And that's
Bill,
been the big story of the past few days.
Antifa story on the DM Zoom. For those who are not watching the DM Zoom, we probably spent 15 minutes on it, and I read you some excerpts from a New York Times piece, which I thought were glamorizing and romanticizing this alleged killer. Why is it that, I mean, you've explained that Trump took the bait, but I'm still really surprised that, you know, there's some stories, the Kyle Rittenhouse story, I think deservedly was a huge story that drove several news cycles. And yet this story that you're referring to was barely a blip. It is interesting to me.
I don't think that is. I mean, I think in an election season especially, but I think in general, as far as what stories have legs, what stories have multi-day news cycles. I mean, reporters will cover the story in and of itself. You know, they report on the murder, they report on the killing of the suspect. But stories have legs when politicians give them legs, when it becomes part of the political conversation, when one side is constantly talking about it. And the right side of the fence here, led by Trump, did not talk about Portland as nearly as much as I would have expected, considering that it was tailor-made for their purposes.
It seems bizarre to me. There must be something we're missing. There must be more to it. Like, why wasn't that a bigger deal?
I mean, I think Trump is a very distractible person. We talk about Trump distracting us. He gets distracted constantly. I mean, one, he is president, so he has to deal with presidential things like the coronavirus. But I think by and large, him getting attacked as disparaging the war dead, I think they recognized that was a serious charge, and they couldn't just let it lie. But they couldn't find a way to respond quickly and get back onto, you know, more politically sound turf for them. Instead, they've made it into a multi-day story, and to the point where Trump adds to the fire by, I'm not just going to deny this is true. I'm going to attack my own military leaders in the process. Yeah, and make that.
I don't remember the exact timing. I mean, did these two stories break like basically simultaneously?
I mean, I don't know the days off the top of my head.
They're kind of blending together for me as well lately.
But I think I think Atlanta came out like a little bit after the shooting of the suspect. But forgive me for not knowing. But they're roughly close together.
Yeah.
And you had, you have a bit of a mystery who said these things to the press, and that could have been something in Trump's favor. No one's corroborating this with their names, so don't trust it. But instead, one of the biggest names here is John Kelly. Instead of Trump trying to put out the vibe, well, if John Kelly doesn't corroborate this, it's not true, he says, well, John Kelly was a loser who couldn't handle the job. So I'm going to give you reason to think that he did say this to the Atlantic. And he attacks his own military leaders as being war profiteers, which, my good friend Glenn Greenwald, tacitly defends Trump on Twitter.
Besties.
Saying, how dare the media treat this as something scandalous when Dwight Eisenhower is the one who talked to the military-industrial complex. So Dwight Eisenhower didn't say, my own military leaders are war profiteers and you shouldn't trust them. He said, hey, watch out for a potential intermingling of these interests over time. But Trump...
It seems like, look, Trump hired McMaster and Kelly and Mattis, and he loved generals as long as they loved Trump.
He hired a Raytheon contractor to be his Pentagon chief.
Look, the notion that Donald Trump is like earnestly concerned about, Lockheed Martin. I don't know. It just
he boasts about arms sales.
This is a reverse engineered, notion that I don't think it holds water.
Which is why it's so intellectually bankrupt for Greenwald to give Trump cover on this. He gives Trump. He went ballistic on Nancy Pelosi going to a hair salon when before learning there actually was evidence that perhaps she did get snookered. And he gives Trump tacit cover, which Trump literally tweets out Greenwald's tweet to defend himself, and doesn't bring up any of these corroborating, mitigating data points.
Let me go back. Let me go back to the where I sort of started with this, which is Bill Scher. I want you to take out the human cost of street violence. Remove that from your mind, and even just take out the threat that this poses to democracy and civilization. Like, just forget about that. Just purely from a political standpoint. If I told you that there was going to be, let's say, another horrific police shooting that sparked massive unrest in major cities, that there would be violence and looting and rioting among the protesting for the next 60 days or 55, I think 55 days is where we're at, I think 54, maybe, whatever. Or if I said there's going to be like no looting, no violent protests, maybe some peaceful protesting, but no violence at all, and no incidents. If your only goal is to elect Joe Biden president, which of those two scenarios do you think would help Trump or Biden the most?
I mean, in my prior here, and this is based on what data has transpired over the past several months, is chaos is bad for the incumbent. Now,
so you were doubling down on this theory.
Well, I mean, I think given those two scenarios, I mean, obviously, the more you have active, clearly defined left-wing violence, it at minimum gives Trump a talking point to use. And you would at least worry, politically speaking, that even if it hasn't worked to date, that it might eventually work. And so you'd rather not have Trump have even the opportunity to test the theory.
Let me ask you this then, a second question. Which of those two options do you think Donald Trump would choose today?
Oh, I think Trump wants. I mean, Kellyanne Conway said it so herself that they think this proves their point about you can't trust Democrats in power because they'll let the rioting and looting run rampant. I just don't see evidence that that's really true. I think Trump believes that, and his team believes that. I
think that the the rioters and the looters hate Trump. The right-wing party, is always seen as the party of law and order. And I think I don't care what the polls say today. Mm. I think if you're Trump and you don't care about the country and you don't care about, individuals, you would roll the dice and go with the street violence. I think that Biden should be rooting against that, not only for humanitarian and democratic reasons, but for political reasons. I think that when we talk about the possibility that Trump could have a vaccine, we talk about other events that could move the needle and actually help Trump win, I still count this among those variables. I mean,
look, Biden is winning, and if you're winning, you don't want volatile events to possibly change.
That's not what you
the status quo.
You said chaos always hurts the incumbent.
Well, I mean, that is what we have seen to date.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying my Jerry Maguire impersonation. That's not what you said. You said if you give an order, people follow it. People die.
But here's the one thing that I think makes the Republican hope of
the transcript.
I think it is hard for Trump and the Republicans to ascribe all of the street violence to the left. So there's an ad that Biden was running where he takes pieces of the speech he gave where he condemned rioting and looting over images of what's going on in the streets. And one of the images is of the Trump caravan in Portland, Oregon, driving into crowds of protesters and tear gassing them.
Yeah.
You don't see Biden flags amongst the left-wing protesters. They don't wear Biden T-shirts. They don't have Biden caps. But you do see bands of Trump marauders going into streets and causing their own chaos. So I think it's just hard to cleanly separate it and say this is all the fault of the left, and if you let Biden in, he's going to give you more of it, because you can look at it and say, you're the guy in charge for the last 4 years, and this chaos seems to be escalating on your watch and fueled by some of your people.
So I will concede that Biden, I think Biden is probably the best Democrat that could be the nominee right now, because he mitigates these things as well as possible. Biden doesn't feel like a radical. That speech he gave in Pittsburgh the other week, where he said, like, "Do I seem like a radical left-wing protester to you?" And he's also, at that same speech in Pittsburgh, did a good job of condemning violence. So I think Biden mitigates this problem, but I still believe that people don't think through things like logically. What they do is they just associate things. And I think issues have built-in skews, right? So, like, if Donald Trump went around saying, I'm going to raise your taxes, I still think people would be afraid of Democrats raising taxes, because we have been conditioned to believe that Democrats raise taxes and Republicans cut taxes. It would take a while for that to change. I mean, eventually, if Trump raised taxes, then there would be a realignment. But we associate raising taxes with Democrats and cutting taxes with Republicans. And I think the same thing is true with violent unrest and rioting and looting, that we associate that as being of the left, and we associate Republicans as being the law and order party. And so it stands to reason to me that the more people are worried or scared about unrest, the more they're seeing it and the more they crave law and order, the better it is for Trump.
I just think we associate Trump with chaos. Ever since Jeb Bush called him the chaos candidate, he'd be a chaos president, and that has been proven true.
All right. Let me float, since you said that, let me float a different theory. You're right, which is why all this stuff will, the rioting, let's say, and the looting would not help Donald Trump, according to your theory, but it would help Senate candidates, right? It would help, McSally or Tillis or whatever.
Well,
what do you think of that?
I think
because they're vanilla, generic Republicans.
I mean, it's theoretically possible. I think what is in Biden and the Democrats' favor is you have a slate of Democratic candidates in the Biden mold. You don't have any Bernie-crats as Senate nominees in the competitive states. So they're all talking about calm. They're all talking about cooperation, independent problem solving, bipartisanship. So you have a team of people that I think it's hard for Republicans to lay that tag on and say, hey, you're contributing to this in some way.
Could you make an argument? Could you make an argument that says, maybe it's late in the game, Joe Biden is probably going to win. He's probably going to be the next president. And you and I know that Joe Biden's not a radical, but he is an empty vessel, and he is going to be fighting off the left of his party. You must have a Republican Senate to serve as a check and balance on that, preserve that. I mean, I don't know if people vote strategically, but is there possible that you could have people, actually making that calculation, maybe even just subconsciously?
The vulnerable Republican incumbents have to do some very quick thinking on this score because there's only so much time left. There's only so much time for new messaging. And I think there is some hope for them that they could run in that way, but they have to be able to argue that they are prepared to work with a President Biden and not be seen as potentially knee-jerk obstructionists. Cory Gardner, I know, in Colorado, he got a bill passed over the summer called the Great Outdoors Act. And so he's milking it. He's got like 3 ads. I passed Great Outdoors Act. Environmentalists love this act. My God, I'm doing so much stuff in Colorado, in Washington. Like he's done one thing in 6 years, and he wants credit for it. So that is the kind of thing you should do. Now he's running as John Hickenlooper, who was governor for 8 years, who Coloradans know, who is very much a bipartisan, worked with Republicans in the Colorado legislature. So it's kind of hard for Gardner to draw that distinction with Hickenlooper because he has his own brand.
You could almost make an argument that if you really want to stop the left from influencing Biden and taking over the Democratic Party, you need Hickenlooper, or people like Hickenlooper in the Democratic Party to win.
Right.
I mean, again, who knows if I think that's asking a lot of voters to game all this out, but
on a state-by-state basis, Steve Daines might have a hard time tagging Steve Bullock, who's the governor of Montana now, as being a radical leftist, and that he would be more cooperative and productive than Bullock would. I mean, I'm not saying Montana's still a Republican state, so I'm not saying Daines can't win, but I'm saying he doesn't have a great matchup to draw that distinction well.
Yeah. You don't even have, it must be hard to be like, but the Bullock Biden left-wing team, like if you're out in that state trying to it has to be Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi want you to.
Well, they want to bring up AOC, of course. I mean, that's what they want to push more, I'm sure, is AOC's stuff. But and maybe there are maybe low information voters that will say, oh, Biden and AOC are in the same party. Yeah, I don't like that. But my sense is, just based on what data is available to us, that most people see Biden as Biden, separate from AOC, and don't think Biden is going to be told by AOC what to do.
Bill, we tend to agree on a lot of stuff, but I do think we have a slight disagreement here. I think you err on the chaos is bad for Trump, and I think I'm at the point where if everything goes according to plan, Trump's going to lose, and if there were more violence, that would redound to Trump's benefit, and if the polls haven't shown it yet, that doesn't mean they won't. That if it happens, it may not. I hope it doesn't happen. But
if I'm Trump, which I'm not, he's nothing like me. I'd be signing a new stimulus package. I'd be complimenting Democratic governors and mayors. I'd be calling up Kim Jong-un and saying, hey, you want to get a quickie deal in here? Keep me around. I'd be trying to do positive things to say, look, I'm making things happen. I may be a little wild, but I get things done at the end of the day. I wouldn't be leaning into chaos.
Okay, thought experiment, Bill. This is like being John Malkovich. If you could be, let's say you were able to be Donald Trump for the next 55 days, you've possessed his. It's a scary thought. It's a horrific thought, but you have possessed Donald Trump, and you can. He will do whatever you tell him to do. You think you could win the race in 55 days? Could you turn it around? If he did exactly what you said.
I would not assume that. I mean, my general assumption has been people's opinions of an incumbent are pretty baked in by this point. It's pretty hard to get people to change their view. But I think the one shot is to do something different that you've been doing that has made you very unpopular to try to change people's view. In this case, it'd be a whole lot more productive and conciliatory and flexible and sane than you have been in the past 3.5 years.
It would be interesting if he could be so president. Remember, he used to joke like, "I'll be so presidential, it'll be boring." Like if all of a sudden, for the next 55 days, he started acting like completely responsible and eloquent and poetic and all that, it would be interesting, and no more tweeting either. So,
all right, I gotta jump.
All right,
I was going to talk to you. We'll DM Zoom on Friday.
Yeah, probably earlier in the day because I got stuff to do. But we will rehash whatever happens between now and then. We'll talk. You can't miss those DM Zooms, Bill. Like I said, we spent like 15 minutes on that alleged murder that was largely forgotten so far.
This is why I pay you $1 a month, yes. so I can get on the Zooms myself.
Yes, it's well worth the $1. It really is, and you get the ebook. But you snuck in. Now it's $3, Bill, the minimum, and you get the ebook with that. So you're one of the lucky ones.
Oh, I got grandfathered in. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Till then.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.